There is a kind of silence that exists only in places where there was once too much noise. A silence that is not the absence of sound, but the presence of ghosts. That is the silence that hits you the moment you cross the threshold of this forgotten mansion. When your footsteps echo across cracked marble floors once walked by millionaires, celebrities, and presidents. Today, weeds have swallowed gardens that once cost more than $3 million to design. Windows imported from Venice now lie shattered, and through them blows a wind carrying the unmistakable smell of dampness, abandonment, and dreams that rotted away along with the walls. In the grand hall where full orchestras once played waltzes, while guests drank champagne worth more than the average worker's yearly salary, there are now only obscene graffiti and the rusted corpse of a chandelier that once illuminated the most luxurious nights in California. 47 rooms, 14 bathrooms plated in gold, an Olympic-sized swimming pool, stables for 15 purebred horses. This mansion was once valued at $85 million. $85 million. A number most people could not spend even across 10 lifetimes of honest work. But the money that built every column, polished every surface, and purchased every work of art that once hung on these stained walls carries an origin darker than the mold creeping through this place. Because this is not just the story of a house collapsing. This is the story of a betrayal that forever changed the global food industry. This is the story of two brothers whose American dream was ripped from their hands by the very man who later built this temple of opulence. Their family name was McDonald, Richard and Maurice McDonald. And the man who stole everything from them, the man who lived in this mansion while they died forgotten, was named Ray Kroc. But money cannot buy immortality, and walls, as silent witnesses to human greed, always end up telling the truth. To understand the true magnitude of this tragedy, we must go back in time, not to the golden years of this mansion, but much further back, to a time when America was hungry in more ways than one. It was 1940, and the world was burning. World War II was consuming Europe, and the United States was preparing to enter the conflict that would define the 20th century. In the middle of that global chaos, in the small town of San Bernardino, California, two brothers of Irish descent made a decision that, without knowing it, would forever change the way humanity eats. Richard McDonald, known as Dick, was 31 years old. He was the visionary, the dreamer, the man who saw possibilities where others saw only problems. His younger brother Maurice, whom everyone called Mac, was more pragmatic, quieter, the kind of man who preferred fixing a machine over giving a speech. Together, they formed a perfect balance, the dreamer and the builder. They arrived in California in 1930, fleeing New Hampshire during the darkest years of the Great Depression. They came with less than $100 in their pockets and more hunger in their stomachs than they ever wanted to remember. They worked in Hollywood studios moving set pieces, a backbreaking job that paid barely enough to survive, but taught them something invaluable. The entertainment industry was a business of illusions, and the American public was willing to pay for experiences that helped them forget their problems. They carried that lesson with them a decade later when they decided to open a small drive-in restaurant called McDonald's BBQ. The concept was not revolutionary. Drive-ins were everywhere across California, places where young people parked their cars and were served by waitresses on roller skates bringing hamburgers, milkshakes, and fries directly to their windows. But Richard and Maurice were not satisfied. The business worked, yes, earning them around $200,000 a year, a fortune for two sons of immigrants who had known real hunger. Yet something bothered them. The service was slow. Customers complained. Waitresses made mistakes. Operating costs were too high. And above all, the food was inconsistent. One day a hamburger was perfect. The next day, it was burned. And then, Richard McDonald had an idea that would change everything. The restaurant closed for 3 months in 1948. When it reopened, it was unrecognizable. They had eliminated the waitresses. They had reduced the menu from 25 items to just 9: hamburgers, French fries, milkshakes, soft drinks, apple pie, and coffee. They had designed a production line system, inspired directly by Henry Ford's automobile factories, where each worker performed a single task and repeated it thousands of times a day until it reached mechanical perfection. They called it the speedy service system. A hamburger that took 20 minutes in any other restaurant was now ready in 30 seconds and cost only 15 cents, half the price of the competition. The success was instant and devastating. Working-class families who had never been able to afford eating out now lined up around the block to taste those perfectly identical hamburgers, served in paper bags that eliminated the need for plates and cutlery. Competing restaurants began closing one after another, unable to match either the prices or the speed of the McDonald brothers. By 1954, the small restaurant in San Bernardino was serving more than 1 million hamburgers a year. Richard and Maurice had built a modest but solid empire, a business that allowed them to live comfortably without the complications of uncontrolled expansion. They had tried franchising, but the experience left them exhausted. Franchise owners did not respect standards, quality suffered, and the brothers, perfectionists to their core, preferred the calm of a single restaurant under their absolute control. They owned a nice but simple house. They drove Cadillacs, but not the most expensive ones. They did not need mansions, yachts, or private islands. What they had built was enough, or at least that is what they believed. Because in the summer of 1954, a 52-year-old milkshake machine salesman named Ray Kroc drove to San Bernardino to find out why a small restaurant in the middle of the California desert needed 8 multi-mixers when most establishments barely bought one. What Ray Kroc saw that day changed his life and destroyed the lives of the McDonald brothers. Kroc was not an ordinary man. He was a predator, dressed in a salesman's suit, an opportunist with the smile of a preacher and the eyes of a shark. He had spent his entire life chasing success, jumping from job to job, from failure to failure, always convinced that his big break was just around the corner. He had sold disposable paper cups during the Great Depression. He had played piano in ballroom orchestras. He had invested in real estate and lost everything. At 52, he had diabetes, arthritis, had lost his gallbladder and most of his thyroid. His first marriage had failed. His bank account was perpetually empty. By every conventional measure, he was a loser. But there was something about Ray Kroc that neither illness nor failure had been able to destroy. A limitless ambition, a greed that knew no satiety, and an almost supernatural ability to recognize an opportunity when he saw one. When he arrived at the McDonald's restaurant in July 1954, Kroc was frozen in place. He watched the lines of customers, timed the service, studied the perfect choreography of the workers behind the counter. And in that moment, he saw something the McDonald brothers themselves did not. They saw a restaurant. Kroc saw a replicable system, a business model that could be multiplied by thousands, by tens of thousands, until it covered every corner of the United States. And beyond that, where Richard and Maurice saw satisfaction and sufficiency, Ray Kroc saw an empire waiting to be conquered. That same night, unable to sleep, Kroc walked through the empty streets of San Bernardino, imagining a McDonald's on every corner of America. Neon lights glowing in the darkness, the smell of hamburgers floating through the air, and himself, Ray Kroc, at the center of it all, richer than he had ever dreamed. The next day, he made the brothers an offer. He would handle the national expansion of the franchises. They would retain control of the brand and receive a percentage of the profits. It sounded reasonable, even generous. The McDonald brothers hesitated. They had been burned before by incompetent franchisees. They did not want more headaches. But Kroc was persistent, more than persistent. He was obsessive. He called them constantly. He visited them repeatedly. He promised he would be different, that he would respect their system down to the smallest detail. Finally, worn down by his insistence, Richard and Maurice gave in. They signed a contract granting them 0.5% of the gross sales from every franchise Kroc opened. It seemed like a good deal, money that would arrive without them having to lift a finger. But there was a clause in that contract the brothers did not read carefully enough. A clause that forbade them from making any changes to their own system without Kroc's approval. A clause that, over time, would turn Ray Kroc into the de facto owner of everything they had built. The pact had been signed. The first years were a frenzy of expansion. Kroc opened restaurants at a speed that seemed almost superhuman. By 1959, there were already 100 McDonald's locations across the United States. By 1965, there were more than 700. Each one was an exact copy of the original restaurant in San Bernardino, with the same golden arches, the same menu, the same production system the brothers had invented. But the relationship between Kroc and the McDonald brothers deteriorated just as rapidly. Kroc was obsessed with control. He wanted to decide everything. The size of the French fries, the thickness of the hamburgers, the color of the uniforms, the exact temperature at which the potatoes had to be fried. Every time the brothers tried to make a change in their own original restaurant, Kroc vetoed it. When they wanted to install air conditioning, Kroc said no. When they wanted to update the kitchen, Kroc refused. The restaurant they had built with their own hands no longer belonged to them. The royalties that had promised a comfortable life turned out to be insignificant compared to the fortunes Kroc was accumulating. 0.5% of gross sales, after taxes and expenses, was barely enough to maintain their modest lifestyle. Meanwhile, Kroc was buying mansions, private jets, and baseball teams. The gap between them and the man who had promised to be their partner was becoming an abyss. In 1961, Ray Kroc made his final move. He offered to buy the brothers out completely, purchasing all their rights to the McDonald's brand. The price was $2,700,000. It seemed like a fortune. And to two exhausted, frustrated men, tired of constant battles with Kroc, it also felt like liberation. But there was a condition. Kroc demanded that the transaction be made in cash, not in company shares. The brothers did not understand the importance of that distinction. They agreed. Had they taken shares instead of cash, those shares would be worth more than $12 billion today. $12 billion. A number so obscene it is difficult to process. But that was not the worst part. In the original agreement, it had been verbally promised that the brothers would retain 1% of all future company profits in perpetuity. That verbal agreement, sealed with a handshake that Kroc later described in his memoirs as one of the hardest moments of his career, was never put in writing. Ray Kroc never paid a single cent of that 1%. When the brothers tried to claim what had been promised to them, Kroc simply denied that such an agreement had ever existed. There were no documents. There were no witnesses. Only the word of two honest men against the legal machine of a multi-million-dollar corporation. But the final humiliation was still to come. As part of the sale agreement, the brothers kept their original restaurant in San Bernardino. However, they could no longer call it McDonald's. The brand that carried their own last name no longer belonged to them. They were forced to change the name to the Big M Kroc, with a calculated cruelty that revealed the true nature of his character, opened a brand new McDonald's directly across the street from the brothers' restaurant, less than 100 meters away. The new location had every advantage: an internationally recognized brand, corporate advertising support, the unlimited resources of the empire Kroc had built on the work of Dick and Mac McDonald. The Big M never stood a chance. It closed its doors in less than a year. The brothers lost everything. Not just their business, but their legacy, their name, their place in history. For decades, the world believed that Ray Kroc had invented McDonald's. He himself fed that narrative, constantly minimizing the role of the true creators in every interview, every speech, and in his autobiographical memoirs. The betrayal was complete. While Richard and Maurice McDonald spent their final years in anonymity, living off the crumbs of a fortune that should have been theirs, Ray Kroc was building his personal monument to greed. The mansion that now rots under the California sun was designed as a tribute to his success. He hired the most prestigious architects in the country. Marble was brought from Carrara, the same marble Michelangelo used to sculpt David. The bathroom faucets were made of 24-karat gold. The Persian carpets covering the floors were handwoven by artisans who devoted years of their lives to each piece. The main garden covered more than 10 hectares and included a hedge maze inspired by the gardens of Versailles. At its center stood a fountain with bronze sculptures representing the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. An artistic choice that, in retrospect, feels prophetically ironic. The library contained more than 15,000 volumes, although servants whispered that Kroc rarely read. The books were decoration, a way to project a culture and sophistication he had never truly possessed. The man who had built an empire on 15-cent hamburgers needed to convince himself he was more than a lucky salesman. In the basement, Kroc ordered the construction of a wine cellar, housing more than 3,000 bottles of the most exclusive wines in the world. There were vintages from the 19th century, bottles worth more than the annual salary of the workers frying hamburgers in his restaurants. The irony was that Kroc, diabetic and with a liver destroyed by decades of excess, could barely drink. The bottles remained sealed, gathering dust and value, trophies from a war only he remembered fighting. The parties at the mansion became legendary. Politicians, Hollywood stars, industrial magnates all passed through those gilded halls, drinking champagne and eating canapés that cost more than a full dinner for an entire family. Frank Sinatra once sang in the Grand Salon. Ronald Reagan, before becoming president, was photographed shaking Kroc's hand in front of the fountain of the Horsemen of the Apocalypse. But there was something the photographs never captured. Servants spoke in hushed voices of a tormented man, of nights when Kroc wandered the corridors of his own mansion, unable to sleep, muttering to himself, of disproportionate outbursts of rage over the smallest infractions, of a marriage quietly collapsing behind the closed doors of separate bedrooms. Joan Kroc, his third wife, had also been taken, quite literally taken, from another man. When Kroc met her in 1957, she was married to Raleigh Smith, one of McDonald's earliest franchisees. Ray became obsessed with her from the very beginning and spent years courting her while maintaining the facade of a professional friendship with her husband. Finally, in 1969, Joan left Raleigh to marry Ray. The scandal shook the business circles of the era. A man who had betrayed his founding partners had now betrayed another man's marriage vows as well. The mansion, which should have been a home, became a gilded prison. Joan and Ray lived parallel lives under the same roof, crossing paths in hallways like strangers who shared an address, and nothing more. Ray Kroc's decline was slow and merciless. By the mid-1970s, his health was deteriorating at a pace that not even his fortune could stop. Alcohol, his constant companion for decades, was taking its toll. His diabetes worsened. Severe arthritis made it difficult for him to hold a glass without spilling its contents. Doctors warned him that every drink was another step closer to the grave, but Kroc had never been good at following advice. The mansion slowly turned into a private hospital. Nurses on permanent rotation walked the hallways at all hours. Medical equipment occupied rooms that once hosted illustrious guests. The smell of disinfectant replaced the perfume of orchids once tended with devotion by the gardeners. Ray Kroc died on January 14, 1984, at the age of 81, at the Scripps Medical Center in San Diego. He did not die in his mansion. He did not die surrounded by the riches he had accumulated with such ferocity. He died in a hospital room, connected to machines humming with indifference as his heart finally gave in. His fortune was estimated at $600 million. He left detailed instructions on how it was to be distributed. The mansion passed into Joan's hands, but she never lived there regularly again. She said the hallways were too full of ghosts. And while Ray Kroc exhaled his final breath in that sterile room, no one mentioned Richard and Maurice McDonald. Dick had died in 1971 from heart failure in a modest home, far from the splendor that should have been his. Mac would die in 1986, also in anonymity, his contribution to history erased by the man who had taken everything from them. The curse of the McDonald's spread to everything that fortune built on betrayal touched. The years following Ray Kroc's death were marked by gradual abandonment. Joan Kroc distanced herself more and more from the mansion, preferring another, more modest residence where she could escape the shadows of her late husband. Dust began to accumulate on the marble surfaces, on the golden frames of the paintings, on the keys of the grand piano that no one played anymore. When Joan Kroc died in 2003, she left most of her fortune to charitable organizations. She donated hundreds of millions to the Salvation Army, to National Public Radio, to causes Ray would probably have despised. It was as if, in death, Joan was trying to wash away the sins of money she had always felt was stained. The mansion passed into the hands of distant heirs, who had no interest in maintaining it. For years it remained in legal limbo, while lawyers fought over its fate. No one lived there, no one cared for it. Patient and persistent, nature began its reconquest. The first signs were subtle. Cracks appeared in the exterior stucco. Roof tiles loosened and fell during winter storms. Gutters clogged with dry leaves that no one bothered to clear. Rainwater began seeping through the roof, creating damp stains that spread like diseases across ceilings hand-painted by Italian artists. The gardens were the first to be completely swallowed. Without regular pruning, the hedges of the Versailles-style maze grew twisted and wild until their perfect geometry disappeared beneath a shapeless mass of vegetation. The roses Joan had cultivated turned into impenetrable thorns. The fountain of the horsemen of the apocalypse filled with stagnant water where mosquitoes laid millions of eggs. Wild animals reclaimed the land. Raccoons nested in the attics. Snakes found shelter in the basements. A family of foxes made their den beneath the main porch, where Cadillacs once waited for their owners. Then came the Vandals. The first documented break-in occurred in 2007. A group of local teenagers, drawn by stories of the abandoned mansion, forced entry through a service door. What they found felt like treasure: antique furniture, works of art, objects that could be sold on the black market. In a single night, they stole 14 paintings, 3 bronze statues, and all the Bohemian crystal that had survived decades inside the dining room cabinets. They left behind broken bottles, graffiti, and excrement on the marble floors. News of the looting spread. More intruders came. Each one took something: gold faucets, light fixtures, fragments of decorative moldings. Someone ripped out the balustrades of the main staircase. Another group carried away the carved mahogany doors of the grand hall. The police were notified, but the property remained tied up in legal disputes, and no one assumed responsibility. Fences and no trespassing signs were installed, but they were systematically ignored. The mansion became a popular destination for urban photographers, explorers of abandonment, and also for those with far less artistic intentions. The fire of 2011 was most likely intentional, although those responsible were never found. It began in the East Wing, in what had once been Ray Kroc's master suite. The flames consumed the room where the hamburger magnate had slept his last nights on the property, where he had signed contracts worth millions, and where he had likely also suffered nightmares about the brothers he betrayed. Firefighters arrived too late to save that section. The roof collapsed, taking the second floor down with it. The water used to extinguish the fire irreparably damaged the parts the flames had not reached. The ceiling frescoes, the Persian carpets, the books of the library, everything was reduced to soaked ashes. Today, the mansion is a skeleton, an architectural corpse decomposing under the California sun, a silent witness to a story few remember correctly. Walking through the remains of this mansion is like performing an autopsy on the American dream. You enter through what remains of the main door, now a rectangular opening flanked by splintered frames, where etched glass once bore the initials RK. The vestibule greets you with the sharp smell of mold, that sickly sweet aroma that is the perfume of decay. The marble beneath your feet is cracked into hundreds of fragments, like the shell of a giant egg broken open by something terrible from within. Light pours through holes in the roof, casting columns of golden dust that feel almost sacred, as if this abandoned place were a cathedral of failure. You can see particles floating in the air, tiny fragments of everything that once was: peeling paint, disintegrated fabric, pulverized wood, the molecular remains of a fortune that no longer exists. The Great Hall is unrecognizable. Photographs from its glory days show a space with 6-meter ceilings, chandeliers weighing more than a ton, and Venetian mirrors multiplying light into infinity. Now the ceiling has partially collapsed, forming a mountain of debris at the center of the room. The mirrors are shattered, and in each surviving fragment you can see a piece of the sky reflected through the openings above. The walls are covered in graffiti. Some are simple tags, territorial signatures of local gangs that have claimed this place as their own. Others are more elaborate. A mural depicting a giant hamburger dripping blood, a clear reference to the origin of the fortune that built this house. In one corner, someone wrote in red paint, "A thief lived here." It is unclear whether the author knew the true story, or simply sensed the truth these walls still hold. The industrial kitchen that had been installed because Ray Kroc insisted on being able to prepare hamburgers identical to those in his restaurants is now a graveyard of appliances. The stainless steel ovens are rusted beyond recognition. The industrial refrigerators lie on the floor, knocked over by vandals or by the sheer weight of time. There are rat nests inside the cabinets, and the smell of animal urine saturates every surface. Climbing the stairs is dangerous. Several steps have collapsed, and the railing, stripped of its balustrades, offers little support. But if you take the risk, you reach the second floor, where the rooms hold the most eloquent ghosts. The guest bedroom once occupied by Frank Sinatra has wallpaper hanging in long strips, like skin peeling from a body. The bed vanished years ago, likely stolen, but the mark where it once stood remains, a clean rectangle amid decades of accumulated filth. The main bathroom in the West Wing astonishingly retains some of its gold fixtures. Not all of them. Someone tore out the faucets with such force that holes were left in the marble, but the light sconces, placed too high to reach easily, still shine with a morbid glint when sunlight hits them. They are like jewels on a corpse, beautiful and obscene at the same time. The library is perhaps the saddest place. The 15,000 books that once filled its mahogany shelves are almost entirely gone. Some were stolen by collectors who recognized their value. Others were destroyed by moisture, turned into masses of moldy pulp. The few that remain lie scattered across the floor, their pages warped and unreadable, their spines broken. Among the debris, I find a title that chills my blood. Grinding It Out. The Making of McDonald's. Ray Kroc's autobiography. The cover is stained, but his smiling face is still visible on the back. I open the book at a random page and read a line underlined by Kroc himself. If you have time to lean, you have time to clean. The irony of finding those words in the middle of this filth is almost unbearable. But the true tragedy is not in the physical ruins. It is in what this mansion represents. The triumph of greed over creativity, of opportunism over innovation. Richard and Maurice McDonald invented a system that transformed the way the world eats, works, and lives. Their vision of efficiency, consistency, and accessibility changed entire industries far beyond food. The principles of the speedy service system were adapted by hospitals, factories, airlines, virtually any organization that needed to process large volumes with speed and uniformity. Yet they received nothing in return. Ray Kroc died with $600 million. Richard McDonald died with less than $1 million, most of it consumed by medical expenses. Maurice had little more. The restaurant they built with their own hands, the place where a revolution was born, was demolished in 1970 to build nothing. An empty parking lot that was eventually occupied by a gas station. The brothers' house in San Bernardino was modest, single-story, with 3 bedrooms and a small garden where Maurice grew tomatoes. There is no abandoned mansion to document, because there never was a mansion. They lived and died as middle-class men, without yachts or private jets, without the art collections their genius should have provided. And Kroc's mansion, this mausoleum of marble and gold, rots as a monument to everything that went wrong in the way we build our fortunes. There is a photograph from 1955 that has always disturbed me. It shows Ray Kroc standing beside Richard and Maurice McDonald in front of the original San Bernardino restaurant. All 3 are smiling. The brothers look genuinely happy, still unaware of what the man beside them would do to them. Kroc's expression is different. There is something in his eyes that cameras of the time could not capture, but that now, knowing the story, is obvious. Hunger. Not the kind that hamburgers satisfy, something deeper, darker, insatiable. That photograph was taken only months before the betrayal began. The brothers still believed they had found a partner, not a predator. They still dreamed of retiring peacefully, enjoying the royalties of a business they had built with honest work. They could not imagine that this smiling man would take everything from them: their brand, their name, their legacy, their place in history. Blood is thicker than water, the saying goes. But gold breaks every bond. Kroc had no blood ties to the McDonald's, Yet he treated them worse than most people would treat a declared enemy. He used them, squeezed them dry, and when he no longer needed them, he discarded them with the same ruthless efficiency they had once applied to making hamburgers. And this mansion, with its overgrown gardens and halls filled with debris, is the final monument to that betrayal. Every crack in its walls is a reminder that dirty money does not buy peace. Every abandoned room is a grave for the dreams of someone who believed wealth was the end of the road, not the beginning of a new kind of misery. There is something the rich do not understand until it is too late. Houses remember. Hallways absorb whispered conversations at night. Walls hear the screams of marital fights. Floors feel the weight of footsteps walked with a heavy conscience. And when those rich people die, when heirs scatter and lawyers finish fighting over the remains, the houses are left alone with their memories. This mansion remembers everything. It remembers the parties where guests toasted Ray Kroc's success, unaware that it had been built on the bones of other men. It remembers the nights when Joan Kroc cried in her room, feeling trapped in a golden cage with a man she may never have truly loved. It remembers Ray's screams when alcohol dissolved the facade of the successful businessman and revealed the broken man underneath. And now, as it slowly collapses under the weight of the years, the mansion tells its story to anyone willing to listen. It speaks in the language of abandonment. Every broken window is a word, every looted room is a sentence, every graffiti-covered wall is a paragraph in the long confession of a fortune. Those who stop to listen understand that this story is not about hamburgers, real estate, or the entertainment industry. It is about what happens to the human soul when it chooses greed over decency, victory over justice, gold over integrity. Kroc won. He died rich and famous, his name engraved on millions of signs around the world. The McDonald brothers lost. They died forgotten. Their contribution minimized or erased from corporate history books. But Kroc's mansion rots. And somewhere in San Bernardino, a commemorative plaque marks the spot where the brothers' original McDonald's once stood. The plaque reads, "Site of the first McDonald's, 1948. It does not mention that they were expelled from their own dream. It does not explain that the empire bearing their name was built by others on the foundations of their genius. But the plaque exists, and as long as it exists, the truth is not completely buried. What does this story teach us? Perhaps that success without integrity is only failure in disguise, that the largest mansions can become the loneliest prisons, that the name carved into a building matters less than the actions taken to get there. The McDonald brothers died without mansions, but they also died without the nightmares that surely haunted Ray Kroc. They died knowing that what they had built was truly theirs, even if others had stolen it. They died with clean hands, even if their pockets were empty. And Ray Kroc, the man who had everything, died alone in a hospital room, far from his 47-room mansion, surrounded not by friends or family, but by hired nurses and the hum of machines trying uselessly to keep him alive a little longer. His fortune did not buy him one extra day. His power did not intimidate death. And his mansions, all of them, including this one we now explore, were left empty, waiting to be devoured by time. The sun begins to set over the abandoned mansion, casting long shadows through broken windows. The golden evening light briefly transforms the rubble into something almost beautiful, momentarily recalling what this place once was at its peak. But the beauty is a lie. Beneath that golden light, mold continues to grow. Beams continue to rot. Foundations continue to sink, millimeter by millimeter, toward total oblivion. In a few years, perhaps in a decade, this mansion will collapse completely. The rubble will be cleared. The land will be cleaned. And some real estate developer will build luxury apartments or a shopping center in its place. Nothing will remain of the house Ray Kroc built with tainted money, except perhaps a few yellowed photographs in county archives. And when that happens, the story of the McDonald brothers will continue to be told by those who remember that justice does not always prevail, that the good do not always win, but that truth, like the weeds invading these gardens, always finds a way to grow through the cracks of power. Richard and Maurice McDonald invented the future. Ray Kroc stole it. And this mansion, witness to that infamous transaction, dies slowly, as everything built on betrayal must die. Because money can buy Carrara marble and gold faucets. It can buy Versailles gardens and wine cellars filled with 19th century bottles. It can buy silence. It can buy forgetfulness. It can even buy a version of history where the villain is the hero. But money cannot buy immortality. And in the end, the walls always speak. If you enjoy uncovering forgotten secrets, subscribe for our next exploration.